So I'm currently recording our session. So before group 5 will start, so let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you, Lord, for this afternoon you've given to us. Thank you for the blessings you have showered upon us. Let us, oh Lord, as we discuss criminal psychology, give us wisdom, understanding, and strength. Lord, kaya medyo mahaba tong session na to, but Lord, just continue to sustain us, Lord God, and I just want to dedicate this class to you, Lord, and I just want to give you back all the glory and honor in His name. So, just a few instructions lang pala. After ng discussion natin sa criminal psychology, we will have a 15-minute break para 10 to 15-minute break. Tapos, we will proceed with sino nga yung next group 6 political psychology. Andito din ba sila?
Yes, ma'am.
So I'll be checking attendance twice. So one is after the criminal psychology, and then ibutan ko lang ang next nga attendance nga Friday, which is ang inyong na after sang political psychology. So twice ko mag-check ha. So just tell me lang if naka-attend sila in sa criminal and sa political psychology. Okay, so I guess so let's begin with group 5's presentation. So you may have the floor.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon, classmates. So, criminal psychology. We are a group 5, criminal psychology. Next slide. So, what is criminal psychology? The term criminal psychology has been defined in a number of different ways. Even today, there is no accepted definition. Criminal psychologists in the UK defined it as that branch of applied psychology which is concerned with collection, examination, and presentation of evidence for judicial purposes. Reitzman described criminal psychology as any application of psychological knowledge or methods to tasks faced by the legal system. Criminal psychology is the study of the thoughts and behaviors of criminals. It answers the question, why do criminals do what they do? According to the Very Well Mind, interest in this career field has grown dramatically in recent years, thanks to the popular television program that depict fictionalized criminal psychologists, such as Criminal Minds and CSI. The field is also highly related to forensic psychology, and some cases the two terms are used interchangeably. Next slide. Thank you. History of the criminal psychology. Criminal psychology is somewhat similar to criminology in the sense that it looks at the thoughts of criminals and what goes through their heads, what their intentions are, and how they react after the crime. In the early years of 20th century, psychologists began to offer psychological perspectives on criminal behavior and to speculate about the cause of crime. Like the police psychology discussed later, criminal psychology typically is not considered in a narrow definitions of forensic psychology, primarily because it appears more theoretical than clinical in nature. However, in its youth, criminal psychology has essentially clinical in nature, as the theory is often centered and in measurable mental capacities of offenders. Furthermore, forensic psychology of a theoretical base and such as provided by criminal psychology is difficult to justify and support. Psychologists like Goddard had repeatedly found that most juvenile and adult offenders are mentally deficient, which led to the conclusion that the primary cause of crime and delinquency was intellectual limitation. In large part of this belief reflected the pervasive influence of Darwinism, which contended that humans differ only in degree from their animal brethren, and some humans are closer to their animal ancestry than others. The mental deficient were considered intellectually and morally less capable of adapting to the modern society. They presumably resorted to the more primitive ways of meeting their needs, such as crime. These unfortunate conclusions, which did not take into account of social conditions, cultural differences, or socialization processes, lent support to unconscionable practices such as lengthy incarceration of the disadvantaged, confused, and the powerless. Next slide. In the history of psychology, few scholars have ventured to offer comprehensive theories on crime or delinquent behavior. Those who have, like an instinct, have often been strongly influenced by Darwinian thinking. Theoretical orientations focusing on mental deficiency or biological and constitutional dispositions dominated early psychological criminology. In the early 1960s, psychological criminology, distinct from psychiatry, are more extensive than psychometrics, began to show signs of life. Hans Stoch, who was also making significant contributions to correctional psychology, edited one of the first books on psychological criminology, The Legal and the Criminal Psychology. Some may argue that Hans Cross published the first criminal psychology book in 1897, the same year in which he was appointed professor in ordinary for criminal law and justice administration at the University of Czernowitz in Austria. One writer has asserted that Gross was the originator of the discipline of criminal psychology. However, Gross was a lawyer by training, in practice, and in spirit, eventually became a successful judge. His book details his observations on offenders, witnesses, jurors, and judges, but relies very little on psychological research. This is not surprising, of course, because psychology in 1897 was far from being an integrated discipline with a rich body of knowledge. Nevertheless, it is significant that Touch's book, published more than 60 years later, represents the earliest attempt to integrate in an interdisciplinary fashion and empirical research of psychologies relevant to the criminal behavior and legal issues. British psychologist Hans Eysenck in Crime Personality formulated the first comprehensive theoretical statement of criminal behavior advanced by the psychologist. Eysenck's theory focused on the personality characteristics of extroversion and introversion, which he believed that could be attributed to the biological predisposition to seek extrovert or avoid introvert sensation and the learning experiences obtained in one's social environment. Although Eysenck's theory was circulated and tested extensively in the late 1960s and 70s, it has been shifted aside today, replaced by the popular development approaches. Shortly after Eysenck proposed his theory, Edwin McGargy put forth his own heuristic statements regarding uncontrolled and over-controlled personalities and their relationship to violence, a theory then served as a basis for his classification system referred to earlier. Touch followed with violent men. The relationship between aggression and violence was studied seriously under the leadership of Leonard Berkowitz. Also, Albert Bandura has a groundbreaking work on psychopaths. They and and later on Robert Barron. Following psychiatrists like Hervey Checklais has a groundbreaking work on psychopaths. They became subject of vigorous theory building and research in the hands of Canadian psychologist Robert Hare and others. Psychopathy continues to be rich in research era and etiology in the criminal behavior to this day. Next, Jai. Four ways a psychology can be performed. Professor Lionel Howard in 1981, one of first fathers of UK's criminal psychology, described four ways psychologists may perform upon being professionally involved in criminal proceedings. First, in clinical. Psychologist is involved in assessment of individuals in order to provide clinical judgment. Psychologists use assessment tools, interviews, or psychometric tools to aid assessment. The assessment can help police or other competitive organs to determine how to process the individual in question. Like, for example, help finding out whether or she is capable of standing in the trial, or whether the individual has a mental illness, which means she is unable to understand the proceedings. And for the experimental, psychologists perform research in order to inform a case. It involves executing experimental tests for the purpose of illustrating a point, of providing further information to the courts. This involves false memory, eyewitness, credibility experiments, and such. It The question is similar to how likely is a witness to see an object in 100 meters. While in actuarial, this involves the usage of statistics in order to inform a case. For example, psychologists may be asked to provide probability of an event occurring. Therefore, courts may ask how likely a person will reoffend if the sentence is declined. While in advisory, psychologists may advise police about how to proceed with the investigation. For example, which is the best way to interview the individual? How best to cross-examine a vulnerable or another expert witness? How an offender will act after committing an offense? Today, organizations such as Federal Bureau of Investigation use offender profiling to help apprehend violent criminals. The goal of criminal profiling is to provide law enforcement with a psychological assessment of the suspect and to provide strategies and suggestions that can be used in the interviewing process. Vin, ikaw na. Next na dyan. Ay, sorry. Profiling. Criminal psychologists can be profilers. What criminal psychologists do? First, profiling. Criminal psychologists can be profilers, helping agencies create a psychological profile to help apprehend suspects. A large part of criminal psychology is looking over research and data relevant to the case. Second is assessment. Assessment is another critical aspect of criminal psychology. Performing psychological testing to determine the suspect's state of mind is an integral part of a judicial process. Next is consultation. Criminal psychologists will often use their expertise to consult with law enforcement personnel on various aspects of the case. In research, criminal psychologists may conduct research that has far-reaching practical implications on the study of criminology and the legal process. Next, Jai. And lastly, court, tes- court, court testimony. Ay, wait lang tayo, balik. Court testimony. Criminal psychologists often have appear in court to provide expert witness testimony. There are psychologists whose entire practice is based on giving their expert opinion. In teaching, a criminal psychologist can teach at a college level within a psychology or criminal justice department. In psychotherapy, a criminal psychologist may also be asked to provide psychotherapy for the people that have committed crimes. Next.
A large part of what criminal psychologist does is studying why people commit crimes. They may also assess criminals in order to evaluate the risk of recidivism or how likely the person is to reoffend in the future, or make educated guesses about the actions that a criminal may have taken after committing the crime. People in this field usually work in office or court settings. A criminal psychologist might spend a considerable amount of time interviewing people, researching an offender's life history, or providing expert testimonies in the courtroom. In some cases, criminal psychologists may work closely with the police or federal agents to help solve crimes, often by developing profiles of murderers, rapists, and other violent criminals. Criminal psychologists are employed in a number of different institutions. Some work for local, state, or federal government, while others are self-employed as independent consultants. Still others choose to teach criminal psychology at the university level or at specialized criminology training facilities. While the job may not be exactly like what we saw on televisions, the realities of this job are far from boring. In addition to profiling, criminal psychologists may counsel people who have committed crimes and psychological assessment. Many psychologists work in computer-related fields like studying internet predators or helping investigate online fraud. Next, we have education and training. In most cases, criminal psychologists start out by earning a bachelor's degree in psychology, just what we're taking up right now. After completing an undergraduate degree, some students enter a master's degree in psychology program. Entering a doctor program after earning the bachelor's degree and the master's degree is another option. Job openings in this specialty area are more plentiful for those with a PhD or Doctor of Psychology degree. To become a criminal psychologist, you should you should seriously consider earning a PhD or Doctor of Psychology degree in clinical or counseling psychology. In some cases, students focus on a particular special area, such as forensic or criminal psychology. Before deciding if it is the right specialization for you, you need to spend some time considering your own capabilities and goals. Due to the nature of this profession, you may find yourself dealing with some truly disturbing situations. You may need to look at crime scene photos or interview people suspected of horrifying crimes. You may be there to deal with the emotional distress that this type of work may cause. Next, Jai. Next, we have famous people in the field of criminal psychology. To understand the artist, you must look at the artwork. To understand the criminal, you must look at and study the crime itself. It is according to John Douglas. As an innovator at the FBI in the late 1970s, John Douglas developed new investigative techniques for hunting serial killers, sex offenders, and other violent offenders. Advancing the use and investigations of the procedure known as criminal profiling, Douglas became widely recognized as its top authority. A mix of psychology, pattern recognition, and inductive deductive reasoning, criminal profiling allows investigators to make educated guesses about suspects or sometimes accurately predicting their age, background, personality, and other identifying characteristics from the barest of clues. While leading the FBI's investigate support unit, Douglas used profiling in numerous prominent cases. One noteworthy use of Douglas techniques came in Atlanta, where 29 murders of African American children began in 1979. In 1981, Douglas stunned investigators and the public with his theory that the killer was a young African American male with a fixation on police soldiers who own a German Shepherd. Ultimately convicted of two of the crimes was Wayne Williams, a 23-year-old black male who drove a surplus police car and owned a German Shepherd. 22 of the other cases were closed by the Atlanta Police Department after the Williams conviction. However, Douglas believed there were other killers responsible for some of the homicides. Next, we have Thomas Bond, a British surgeon, widely considered the Western civilization's first true criminal profiler. Bond's rise to prominence originated with his involvement in the investigation of London's notorious Jack the Ripper killings. In the late 1880s, serial killer Jack terrorized the streets of London. The police were having no luck in finding a suspect. That's when Dr. Bond and his colleague involved in what many consider the first application of criminal profiling methodologies. Dr. Bond studied autopsy results and crime scene evidence from Jack murder's victims. Utilizing his expertise in human behavior and biology, Dr. Bond drafted a detailed report of what he believed to be the Jack the Ripper's personality traits, behavioral characteristics, and lifestyle. Many in law enforcement believed that Jack the Ripper had a medical background due to his removal of the victim's internal organs and other surgical incisions made to their bodies. But Dr. Bond contradicted the prevailing view by assessing that the killer had no medical training or whatsoever, and that his mutilation of the bodies showed he had no true knowledge of the human anatomy. Despite Dr. Bond's detailed written report of Jack the Ripper's characteristics, the police never found the killer. Nevertheless, the early days of criminal profiling had now begun, and the future investigators have relied upon some methodologies. Next, we have Professor Cantor, who became known internationally in 1986 for the offender profile that helped the police to catch the railway rapist and serial killer John Duffy. This was the first time such a contribution was made to a police investigation by a professor of psychology anywhere. It was also the first time that offender profiling had been used in the United Kingdom police. Since 1986, he has contributed to over 150 investigations around the world of many different kinds of crimes, such as arson, armed robbery, stabbings, anonymous offensive letters, serial rape, and murders. The success of early profiles set him on the track to develop a science-based approach to helping police investigations, which he called investigative psychology. His account of this work with the police in the development of the new discipline of investigative psychology was published in his 1994 award-winning book, Criminal Shadows. Lastly, we have Saul Cousin, is a distinguished professor of psychology at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. Cousin pioneered the scientific study of false confessions. He has also studied the effect confessions have on the judges, juries, lay witnesses, forensic science examiners, and the plea bargaining process. His research has been funded by the National Science Foundation. Cousin is is the past president of the APA's Division 41 American Psychology Law Society. In 2017, he received the Distinguished Contributions to Research in Public Policy Award from APA, and in 2007, he was awarded an APA Presidential Citation for his work on false confessions. His work has been cited all over the world, including by the US Supreme Court and the Supreme Court of Canada. He has appeared as an analyst on television, news shows, and in documentaries, most notably Ken Burns' 2012 film, The Central Park Five. So, next slide, please. So, why is criminal psychology so important? Criminal psychologists assist law enforcement in apprehending responsible parties and help teachers educate about the criminal mind. They are helping in finding those responsible and ensuring an accurate and ethical legal process. Criminal psychology findings may help identify suspects, potentially allowing authorities to prevent future crime or catch a serial criminal. On a larger scale, understanding what motivates criminals to break the law, whether intentionally or otherwise, is necessary for creating the societal conditions that may allow them to stop. In addition to helping investigators to gain a glimpse into criminal psyche, criminal psychologists help law enforcement to predict an unknown offender's age socioeconomic status, educational level, habits, and personality traits, as well as the type of community or neighborhood where an offender is likely to live. Criminal psychologists seek to understand the motivations of the criminals and develop a psychological profile to understand or apprehend them. They examine individual criminal behaviors and diagnose any mental health conditions. They frequently step into the courtroom to provide expert testimony. Next, please. Offender profiling or criminal investigative analysis. Criminal profiling refers to the process in which the nature of a crime is used to make inferences about the personality and other characteristics of the offender. Profiling uses information gleaned from the crime scene or relating to the offender's behavior during the crime. The goal of criminal profiling is to provide law enforcement with psychological assessment of the suspect and to provide strategies and suggestions that can be used in the interviewing process. Profiling is not widely accepted in the psychological and legal community, and some courts have even ruled profiling testimonies inadmissible. There are two main reasons for this. First, a criminal profile only gives a broad indication of the type of person who may have committed the crime. It does not indicate a specific individual who happens to fit the profile. The profiler is therefore unable to say whether it is more probable than not that a specific offender did in fact commit the crime. Secondly, there is no scientific evidence to support the reliability and validity of criminal profiling in solving crimes. Indeed, it seems that when profiling does assist the police in solving a case or opening up a new lines of investigation, it is the exception rather than the rule. Next, please. Interviewing, detecting deception, and eyewitness research. An important task during an investigation is collecting reliable evidences to put together what happened in the event in question. One of the main sources of evidence is the eyewitness to the event. Interviewing witnesses, especially those who have been victim of serious crimes such as sexual abuse and those who need most help to remember accurately, is often accompanied by governmental decisions to tape record interviews with alleged victims or bystanders who witnessed what took place. Research from several countries like Germany, Canada, Australia, and the USA seem to be in agreement that interviews should involve a series of sequential phases that described as establish rapport, obtain free recall, ask appropriate questions, and achieve closure. An extensive international program of psychological research has in the last 20 years developed ways of interviewees to remember as much as possible about the events. Cognitive interview is a procedure involves a number of techniques based on major research findings and theories in cognitive psychology concerning how memory works and social psychology on what constitutes good communication skills. On the other hand, detecting deception could be done in a lot of methods and procedures, but it has its severe limitations. Combining behavioral and speech cues is one of possible ways to improve lie detection. Polygraph is an equipment that measures various sorts of internal bodily activities such as heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, and sweating of the palm. These activities are displayed on charts or on computer screens that usually seen in movies or televisions. It is used in attempting to detect deception through internal bodily activities. While some research studies have found out that certain aspects of speaking may be related to lying, like increases in voice speech and speech errors. Such increases in voice are hard to detect with the human ear. Voice stress analysis is an equipment that has been used to detect lying through few studies that have been published. The crucial contribution of criminal psychology to better the evaluation of the eyewitness testimony is to make investigators, courts, and juries aware that memory does not act like a tape recorder. Thousands of psychological research studies found that during an event, we only focus on certain parts of it. We do not put all the parts into memory, and when we try to retrieve from memory limited amount of information that actually is in there about the event, can't be retrieved all that is there, or we retrieve based on our expectations. Next, please.
Police psychology. Police psychology is worried about the utilization of mental information to aid police examination. Not the least, there is another art of work inside which analysts and the use of their insight can be extremely helpful to the police. Clinicians, both word-related and criminal, have contributed their insight throughout the most recent 25 years, or something like that, to the course of cop enlistment through the presentation of psychometric tests. So first is evaluate whether an individual is a self-assured individual open to influence and aware of detail. Then, giving counsel on the creation of meetings and appraisal focuses, which will dispense with individuals who don't have vital characteristic or the people who will succeed in such job. Therapists have additionally a continuous contribution to the control of police pressure. Analysts have been instrumental in exhorting the police on what systems would be advantageous, for example, peer guiding and self-improvement programs. So police psychology is the part also of forensic psychology that works with police. So when it comes to police psychologists naman, so they use the science of psychology to provide a number of important services that support police work, police officers, and also police departments. Next, Jai. So expert witnesses. Legal disputes can include complex issues, for example, the introduction of data that is considered to be past the normal layman who might serve on a jury. Master observers are allowed to give their perspective on the issue viable, the way where master observers are brought to the court, not the least fluctuates from ward to another. Before, the utilization of an analyst as a specialist witness was restricted by the possibility that the master needed to give data that was past the normal individual's information. By and large, the acceptability of a clinician viewpoint was frequently restricted to giving proof identifying with mental impedance or the mental working of a person. Lately, analyst mastery has been progressively perceived and would now be able to be called upon as proof, according to a wide assortment of issues. For instance, the effect of talking procedures on a suspect or witnesses, the unwavering quality of onlooker declaration, clinical appraisal of suspect or witnesses, and the utilization of profiling strategies during examination. So, expert witnesses can be anyone with knowledge or experience of a particular field of discipline beyond that to be expected of a layman. So, their duty also is to give to the court or tribunal an impartial opinion on particular aspects of matters with his expertise, which are in dispute. Next, Jai. So, criminal psychologist and assessment and treatment of offenders. So, criminal clinicians work to comprehend hoodlums' inspiration and make a mental profile of them to all the more likely comprehend and catch them. They are vigorously associated with work including the evaluation, restoration, and the executives of wrongdoers, regardless of whether locally or detainment. This job might involve working with guilty parties to decrease their odds of reoffending later on, or it might involve a more clinical job tending to wrongdoers' mental requirements. Then these mental requirements might be identified with the result of the wrongdoing the perpetrated. Um, For instance, advancement of post horrendous pressure problem or acknowledgement of the effect of their offense on their causality, and the climate where they are held, and the appraisal of guilty parties is one of the first continuous works of a criminal clinician working with wrongdoers after they have been condemned. This incorporates an exhaustive assessment of their odds of reoffending, their danger of mischief as this evaluation can be utilized to deal with the wrongdoers featured dangers and the necessities, eliminating the arranging regarding the exercise that the guilty parties will participate in during their sentence. Next, Jai. Moreover, if a guilty party is carrying out a local area punishment and not really set in stone to represent a high danger to people in general, the wrongdoer might be liable to observing plans to diminish the danger that the person in question presents. Criminal analysts have been a dynamic in this turn of events, adding to the plan conveyance and the executive of projects that endeavor to address wrongdoers' musings, perspective, and conduct to add to their culpable conduct and forestall further culpable. Also, clinicians are additionally associated with the administration of these projects, guaranteeing that the suitable assets are set on such projects and that they are conveyed in the way expected by the originator. The jail or probation clinician's job isn't restricted to restoration work. Inside these settings, a criminal clinician may likewise be engaged with directing exploration, regulating jail or probation staff preparing, planning reports for courts itemizing the danger level, needs, and other data identifying with a singular guilty party, going to court, going to group and region gatherings, and an escapable organization. So, criminal psychologists and academia research. With the growth of interest in criminal psychology over recent years, there has been an increased demand for courses to which specifically teach the theory and the practice of criminal psychology. Therefore, there has been a corresponding increase in the number of criminal psychologists working in the field of academics. So there are two main roles of academic criminal psychologists. First is teach student about criminal psychology. This includes the psychology of criminal behavior, of the courtroom, psychology and investigation, the assessment and treatments of the offenders, and how to carry out criminal psychological research. So Studying criminal psychology can help prevent more crimes from happening in future. Ultimately, understanding a criminal's mind is the best way to reduce crime. Once we understand how criminals think, um, we will be able to understand why they are committing crimes in the first place and stop it from happening. Next is to carry out research within the field of interest. The ability to do can often be dependent on a variety of outside factors such as availability of funding and access to privileged data or to imprisoned individuals. Lastly, is the work of academic criminal psychologists can be frustrating, tedious, and time-consuming. However, at times this work can be very interesting and usually rewarding. Most criminal psychologists working in universities are also required to be involved in professional practice, such as giving advices. So, this dedicated professional assist a student with their social and emotional development. So, identify and remove barriers that prevent students from maximizing their academic potential and also help guide students to post high school education and also job opportunities. Thank you.
Okay, guys, so let us go ahead and talk about the theories behind the criminal behavior. Next slide, Jai, please. Okay, so first is the rational choice theory. This theory explains that every choice that is made is completed by the first considering the costs, risk, and benefits of making that decision. This theory explains that when a person commits a crime, that person is well aware that he will about to commit a crime. He knows the consequences of it, but do it anyway. And crime can only be regulated and controlled for those people who rationally commits the crime if that person will get enough of fears a sanction na he will face after committing the crime. The bigger the punishment and the higher the chance nga madakpan siya will decrease the percentage of the person to commit the crime. However, if there's a lower chance that he will get caught and higher reason for him to commit the crime, let's say his reason is needs be, then the person will likely to commit the crime again. For example, a person needs a money for the hospitalization of his loved one, and so he thinks that the easiest way to get some money is to rob someone. He is aware that what he is about to do is a crime and he could be in jail for it. But his need in money is bigger than the fear for the punishments. Then he will also begin to weigh things. If example hold up siya be sa aga, then there's a big chance nga madakpan siya kag ma-jail gid man siya. But if hold up siya sa gabi, mangbantay be let's say sa madulom nga parts ng dalan for his victim, he will less likely nga madakpan since madulom and not everyone could notice him and he really needs money. With that reason, the person will likely to commit the crime at night gid because his fear of getting caught and be punished is lessened sa thought nga if hold up siya sa gabi, mas less ang chance nga madakpan siya kag mapriso. So according to Burke, there's three models of criminal behavior. First is a rational actor. The decision is completely on the person if he will commit a crime or not. Second is predestined actor. They believe that criminals are born this way and are predestined to commit crimes. However, genetics can't be only a sole reason why a person became, let's say, a serial killer. Predestined actor model also states that it is also the things that happen to us the early years of our life that determine our ability to develop criminal behavior or not. Next is the third one is the victimized actor model occurs as a result of the criminal being victim of an uneven society as a result amending the law could help to reduce the crime. Example sa mga movies nga nalantaw, tabala na ang person hindi kakwa justice because iya contra has money and power. So most likely the person who experienced the injustice of this world will most likely to commit a crime gate to get the justice that he deserved. Next slide, Jai, please. Okay, hala, wala na butang ang ano. Okay, so for this theory, it's a psychodynamic theory. This theory is of yes, ara na. Okay, so this theory, offender believe that offenders, according to the psychodynamic researchers, have dominated personalities. This leads to issues with impulse control and an increase in pleasure-seeking behaviors. Immaturity, poor social skills, and excessive reliance on others are some issues connected with the shattered ego. The idea is that negative experiences in an offender's childhood damages the ego, therefore the offender is unable to cope with the conventional society. Okay, so this theory proposes that the person commits a crime is because something wrong happened to them during their childhood years. This theory also sees criminal behavior as a conflict between the ego, and superego. This conflict can lead to people developing problematic behavior and delinquency. Okay, so as we all know, id is our desire or want, and ego is the reality, and superego is the our consensya. And then sa mga criminal, may mga criminal behavior, they can't control their wants. However, let's say Abi, this person thinks the other person like kasaba di siya, gusto ko sapat yun. So usually our super ego will say no, you can't do that because that is wrong and you could be in jail and that. However, they cannot think of that way. They only think nga gusto nila patyonan that person and they cannot control that desire to kill that someone. Next slide, please. Next is the social process theory. Okay, so this theory believes that criminality is a function of individual socialization and the interaction people have and the interactions people have with organizations, institutions, and processes of society. Learning theory of Bandura is perhaps the most common approach to this social process theory. His observations began with animals demonstrating that they do not need to be exposed to a particular occurrence in their environment in order to learn properly. In relation to the criminality, one can learn to be aggressive by observing others acting aggressively. Okay, so for this one, it explains that criminality as a function of people, as yes, people in all work of life have the potential to become criminals if they maintain a destructive social relationship. Example, let's say a person has the environment with a violent family, then that person will most likely become a violent too because he is or that person is exposed to a violent environment. Okay, so for this one, we have two approaches. Give me 1 second. Two approaches of social process theory. First is social control theory, is when one's behavior is groomed through the close association of institution and individuals. So example for this one sa mga movie, again nga mga nalantaw, tabala na wherein like say bata pa, 7 years old, gina-train na how to hold a gun, how to shoot, and how to kill. Then after 20 years or more, naging assassin ang bata nga na or naging hired killer is because he is groomed when he was 7 years old and trained to become a killer. And then next is a social reaction theory. It is excuse me. It is if an individual is already viewed or labeled as a criminal from an early age, then it is more likely that this person will see becoming a criminal as a fulfilling prophecy, thus beginning his criminal career. Okay, so again, my example, guys, is about the K-drama that I watched. Sorry, para lang to ako K-drama. So there's this father. He is a notorious serial killer, and then he got a son, and then And then people think that the son of that serial killer will become a serial killer too, since his father is a serial killer. And so as the child grew up, he also heard that he will become a serial killer because his father is a serial killer. He got bullied he because of it, and got no friends because other kids are afraid of him. So in the end, naging serial killer din man ang bata nga to, and just fulfill the prophecy because his father is a serial killer, and follow what other people told him nga magiging serial killer man gid siya. Okay, so next slide please. Okay, let's go ahead and tackle some sample criminal case here. Okay, about the case of Ted Bundy. Okay, let's know about Ted Bundy. So he is born or was born last November 24, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont in the 1970s. He raped and murdered young women in several states. He was connected to at least 36 murders, but some thought he had committed 100 or more. He was executed he was executed in Florida's electric chair in 1989. His charm and intelligence made him something of a celebrity during his trial, and his case inspired many novels and films about serial killers. Next slide, please. Next slide, Jai, please. Balik sa may early years. Oh, yeah. Okay, so Theodore or Ted Bundy started life as his mother's secret shame. Eleanor Cowell was 22 years old and unmarried when she had her son Theodore, which scandalized her deeply religious parents. She delivered the child at a home for unwed mothers in Vermont and later brought her son to her parents in Philadelphia. To hide the fact that he was an illegitimate child, Bundy was raised as the adopted son of his grandparents and was told that his mother was his sister. Eleanor moved with Ted to Tacoma, Washington a few years later. In 1951, she married Johnny Bundy, and the couple had several children together. From all appearances, Bundy grew up in a content, working class family. Bundy showed an unusual interest in the macabre at an early age. Around the age of 3, he became fascinated with knives or by knives. Bundy was a shy but bright child who did well in school, but not with his peers. As a teenager, a darker side of his character started to emerge. Bundy liked to peer in other people's windows and thought nothing of stealing things he wanted from other people. Next slide, please. While a student at the University of Washington, Bundy fell in love with a wealthy, pretty young woman from California. He had everything that he wanted: money, clothes, and influence. He was devastated by their breakup. Many of his later victims resembled with college girlfriend, attractive student with long dark hair. His killings, also unusual, followed a gruesome pattern. He often raped his victim before beating them to death. The exact number of women Bundy killed will never be known. There is also some debate when he started killing most, but most sources say that he began his murderous rampage around 1974. By this time, he had transformed himself, becoming more outwardly confident and active in social and political matters. He had graduated from University of Washington with a degree in psychology in 1972 and had been accepted to law school in Utah. Bundy even got a letter of recommendation from the Republican governor of Washington after working on this campaign. Around this time, many women in the Seattle area and in nearby Oregon went missing, and stories circulated about some of the victims last being seen in the company of a young, dark-haired man known as Ted. He often lured his victims into his car by pretending to be injured and asking for their help. Their kindness proved to be a fatal mistake. Next slide, please. Bundy moved to Utah in the fall of 1974 to attend law school, and women began disappearing there as well. The following year, he was pulled over by the police. A search of his vehicle uncovered a cache of blurry toes, a color bar, a face mask, a rope, and handcuffs. He was arrested for possession of these tools, and the police began to link him to much more sinister crimes. In 1975, Bundy was arrested in the kidnapping of Carol Daranch, one of the few women to escape his clutches. He was convicted and received a 1 to 15 year jail sentence in the case. 2 years later, Bundy was indicted on murder charges for the death of of a Colorado woman. He decided to act as his own lawyer in this case. During a trip to the courthouse library, Bundy jumped out a window and made his first escape. He was captured 8 days later. Next slide, please. In December 1977, Bundy escaped from custody again. He climbed out of a hole he made in the ceiling of his cell and even dropped more than 30 pounds to fit through the small opening. Authorities did not discover that Bundy was missing for 15 hours, giving the serial killer a big head start on the police. He eventually made his way to Tallahassee, Florida. There, on the night of January 14, 1978, Bundy broke in the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. He attacked four of the young female residents, killing two of them. On February 9, Bundy kidnapped and murdered a 12 years old girl named Kimberly Litch. These crimes marked the end of his murderous rampage as he was soon pulled over. Give me 1 second. Balit na liwat bitay. Okay. He was pulled over by the police that February. In July 1979, Bundy was convicted for the two Chi Omega murders. The most damning evidence came from his own viciousness. The bite marks on one of the bodies was a definitive match for Bundy. He was given the death penalty twice for these crimes. Bundy received another death sentence the following year in the murder of Kimberly Litch. Next slide, please. Okay, Bundy fought for his life, spending years appealing his death sentence, an infamous national figure since his Florida trials. He remained a source of fascination for many. Actor Mark Harmon even played Bundy in the 1986 television movie The Deliberate Stranger. Bundy tried to take his case as high as the U.S. Supreme Court, but he was turned down. Bundy even offered information on some of unsolved murders to avoid Florida's electric chair, but he could not delay justice forever. On January 24, 1989, Bundy met his fate at the Florida State Prison. He was put to death around 7 a.m. that morning in an electric chair, sometimes known as Old Sparky. Outside the prison, crowds cheered and even set off fireworks after Bundy's execution. In the end, he had admitted to 36 killings, but experts believe that the final tally may be closer to 100. That did not stop the public's interest with Ted Bundy. His life has been the subject of countless books and documentaries, trying to shed some light on this brutal killer's crimes. Next slide, please. Thank you
So
for
next,
listening, everyone.
so the next one is the psychology of crime. So why people commit crime? So in extensive research points to complex mix of genetics, personality, life circumstances, and environmental factors. So people commit crime for various reasons. So these reasons include social, economic, and cultural reasons. So in social reasons, like for example, poor parenting skills includes when children are neglected or abused. Yes. And also when there are parents who have permissive or neglecting style of parenting. So kumbaga they are permissive because they are not being able to say no sa ilang children because they don't want to upset their child or they are spoiled like that. Ang sa economic reason, poverty, kung diin ang mga tao may nga dako pamilya nga hindi nila masagod, because wala sila enough money nga i-buy Canada. So next is, wait lang din ma'am, na internet. So next one is, how do criminals choose victims? So one study found that criminals were more likely to label someone a potential victim if they appeared noticeably different to those around them or was moving distracted or unusual ways. So criminals choose their victims if they appear different to those around them. So example is walking style of a person. So in walking style of the person, it can give impressions sa criminals because like hindi ka confident, distracted ka, or lost ka. Like, example, maglakat ka nga isahanon ka lang, dulom kag wala ka upod, siyempre makahatag siya behavior nga nervous ka or unusual ka kag maka-attract ni siya sa criminals. So next one, what causes a person to commit crime? So individuals commit crimes out of necessity, others driven by anger, rejections, or authority, that manipulative personality or psychopathic tendency. So stereotypes that mentally ill people are prone to crime is not accurate. There are instances where mental illness such as psychosis, substance abuse, or severe bipolar disorder could influence someone to break the law. So, so individual commit crimes for a variety of reasons. Nag-include siya sa poverty, may rejections, or may kaakid ka sa isig kapariho mo. So, amo nag-commit sila sa crime. So, next please. So, facts about kidnapping. So, first one, next slide, Jai. So, part the brain does. Next slide, Jai. Next fact. Next one. So the first facts about criminal brain is parts of the brain are deformed. So there is some parts of our brain are smaller in criminals that they are in normal people. So our frontal lobe controls decision making and emotion. So criminals may have less authority over these functions. So this study of psychopaths also found that the portion of amygdala had a volume of 18% less than what you would find to a normal person. So, antisocial people who fall into the category of psychopath find it significantly more difficult to know what to know when an expression is sad. So, kumbaga dubudlay sa ila mag-give expressions and kidlay sila makatag sa expressions that are responsible for their thinking, motivation, or they control their emotions. So a tumor could be a blame. So here naman, some criminals have been found to have a cancer that probably contributed to their unthinkable acts. So one of the most notable of these is Charles Whitman, who killed 16 people at the University of Texas in 1966 before being killed by police. So, see, Charles Whitman, he had been experiencing terrible headaches and wrote that he was having many irrational thoughts. So, so Charles, Charles Whitman had a brain tumor that's crucial for his emotion and behavioral control. So, this brain tumor is called glioblastoma tumor. Excuse me. So in his suicide note, he wrote before killing his wife and mother that he asked for an autopsy to perform on him to see if there was something in his brain that caused him to act this way, na nagapamatay siya sa tao. So, doctor found out that may ara siya glioblastoma tumor that could be the reason nga naga-affect sa iya actions and behaviors. So, wala man. So, next slide. So, chemical levels. So, next one is chemical levels in the brain are up. So, some criminals' brains have different levels of neurotransmitter, like serotonin or dopamine than normal brains. So, our serotonin are at the proper level keep people from acting aggressively when they are frustrated or when someone's brain has lower amount of chemicals or that person may react impulsively and violently. Whilst the dopamine levels of criminals affect whether a person feel rewarded for an action. If ila dopamine levels increase significantly when someone acts aggressively, they will feel good about it and do it again. So next is the brain doesn't respond to a facial expression. So psychopaths may not have brains that register fearful expression on other faces. So people with antisocial personality disorder have trouble recognizing faces showing fear and sadness. So psychopaths have almost no reaction to expressions of fear, while normal people's brain become active when they see a scared expression. So this difference may be what keeps psychopaths from feeling remorse since they don't register that they are causing pain or sadness. Next slide. Explain ko na. So next is they're fearless. So the brain of psychopath doesn't react with fear as frequently as ours do. So in this test of criminal psychopaths, researchers have found that they have lack of fear conditioning that cause the rest of us to be afraid when we know something is bad is coming. So this lack of anxiety over consequences of their actions can make psychopaths very dangerous criminals. So next one is there are many warning signs as early as age of 3. So when researchers tested the reaction of large group of 3-year-olds to certain sounds, they expected them to have a measurable reaction when they knew an unpleasant noise was coming up. So 8% of 3-year-olds who did not react to loud noises the same way as others have criminal records for crimes ranging from violent to serious driving infractions. So this doesn't mean that all children whose brains don't register fear the same as others will be criminals, but it does indicate that they are more likely to act criminally, but the steps should be taken to raise them in way to help to stay out of trouble. So next slide. So the rational side and irrational side communicate too much. So in criminal psychopaths, these bundles of fiber is longer and thinner than in average person. So it also seems to have more activity, meaning more communication between the two hemispheres than normal. So the corpus callosum is the bridge in the brain that connects rational left side with irrational right side. So it also seems to have so it also seems to have more activity, meaning more communication between two hemispheres than normal. So nag-increase din siya communication causes psychopaths to be divided between rational and irrational. So this often leads to more impulsive behavior since they have difficulty thinking to consequences in rational way. So next one is they're genetically predisposed to crime. So some criminals are product of their environments, coming from abusive homes or bad neighborhoods, but large number of murderers were raised relatively conflict-free households. So kumbaga dere, murderers are more prone to violent behavior because of the deficits in their brain. So criminals from loving, wealthy, or upbringing person can commit horrible to violent crimes. So some criminals are product of their environments, but large number were raised in conflict-free homes. Next slide. Teen brains aren't fully formed yet. So the teenagers are considered adults in the majority of the US, but their brains aren't developed enough to be tried as adults. So they are impulsive, more susceptible to peer pressure, are less able to think of ways out of bad situations. So ang critics argue that the death penalty should be used for teenagers since their brains aren't fully developed yet. So ill reasonings and judgment are known to mature throughout the teen years and into person's 20s. When they compare to adults, ang teenagers are impulsive, per, per pressure, are less able to think ways of the bad situation. So aggression also peaks into teenage years but can grow out of it. Next slide. I know no. Balik. So last one is smoking while pregnant can lead to children with criminal tendencies. So when a mother smokes while pregnant, she may be harming her baby's brain in a way that will make him or more likely to become a criminal. So research shown that the average adult, or meaning those who didn't come from moms with mental illness or experience deprivation, is more likely to have been arrested at some point if their mother smoked while pregnant. So, it seems that the nicotine causes abnormalities in the development of attention and impulse control sa brain ng bata. So the findings held up for both men and women with mothers who smoke. Okay. Tapos na.
Okay, so thank you very much. Group 5 for your presentation. Okay, so any questions from the class regarding uh, regarding your presentation, regarding the presentation? Okay, so very, very interesting and very, I think, relevant. I think some of you wanted to pursue a career in forensic psychology, and as we know, man, forensic psychology is a very broad branch, and there's also another branch of psychology that really really tackles with the criminal mind, which is a criminal psychology. And I'm glad that Group 5 has shared their insights, their inputs. So just a few questions lang sa group ninyo. So, okay, so what have you discovered, or were you sa research niyo, what were some insights that you discovered while researching for your topic? Like mga wala nyo natunan sa una nga na-realize nyo, ay, ang galing, or some misconceptions about criminal psychology or about criminals that you were able to discover while you were researching about your topic?
For me, ma'am, maybe the thing that I learned the most while I'm searching about the criminal psychology is that our early years is really 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 important, Kitja, because our early years has a big factor, Kitja, to determine what we will become in the future. Like for example, sa mga criminal bala, usually they have really bad childhood years, that's why they become like that, nga naging criminal.
Okay. Uh, how about how about other
So amo na.
members of your group? Okay, thank you very much. How about other members of your group? Mga na-learn nyo or na-discover nyo while researching for your topic?
Good afternoon.
Okay, hello, Francis.
What I've learned from this topic is that the process itself of becoming a criminal psychology is very, very long and very difficult at the same time. Pero when you were on the job, then like you're working as a criminal psychologist, it's very interesting and like we've seen in the movies, it's not boring and it's very interesting at the same time. Although, or however, the job is very challenging. Say man, you need of course lakas ng loob kumbaga to see the crimes and to face the criminals and to find out what motivates those criminals or the reason behind why criminals do such things. So it's somewhat like a scary job, but when you find those motivations and the other things, it's really fulfilling and worth it.
Mhm. So, tama rin. No? So, kita ko man ang career path. So, you really, so far, subong ka sa Philippines, wala, I think, pa university nga nag-offer program on criminal psychology because, well, it's not really a well-researched pa or wala pa group of teachers that can teach kay kay lain ang forensic psychology practice diri sa Philippines mo. Pero I think the group, the presenter number 9 will expound on that, ang practice sa forensic psych. So, more on the justice systems that uncover. Pero ang criminal psychology is more on muna sa research about what makes the criminals think, anong ilang mga thinking, motivations, behavior. So, that's why if you really want to pursue that career, so wala gid problema, pero like I said, equip yourself na nga daan, especially din sa research, especially if you want to pursue your master, your PhD. So, research skills, yun ang number one, yung dapat i-develop. Kaya, that's your way that you can be admitted to such universities, especially higher, even more higher education. So, I think, man, some of your classmates, I think, ilang research topic about ng ganit sa mga scams and all. So, interesting man that you are also leaning into that um topic. So, even in your undergrad research. So, sa gusto naman kung research sa mga topic, galingan nyo, do your research. Also, man mo kung ano man ang inyong research topic man. Sige. So, um, this time, I will just check your attendance. so that para after this we will have a short break, 15-minute break para makapahuway-huway kita. So far 2:21, so at least para mag 2:35 baka ano kita wrong. So that after this we can after this may break kita, makapanyaga ka mo kung wala pang mapanyaga or snacks. And then we will proceed to the next topic, which is also a very relevant topic, political psychology.